Models coming forward on the T-6 and the L-13. L-13 showing off a little bit there with a very quick lift off the runway. But again, that's what L-birds were all about during World War II, as helicopters had not been developed yet or were under development during World War II, but were not used widely or extensively. And L-birds, like the one you're seeing here today, provided those type of services during the war. Many of the L-birds were simply civilian aircraft that were pressed into service with a few modifications to make them a little more usable in the military. L-birds were used like you would use a helicopter today because, again, as you notice, they can take off very quickly and land in a very short distance, and that was very, very vital to getting into tight situations. L-birds were used for artillery spotting, as they could loiter over the enemy positions and pinpoint them so that our artillery could hit with pinpoint accuracy. They could be used to deliver messages if necessary, if radio communications were down. Even some of the aircraft were fitted for stretchers so that wounded could be evacuated from the frontline area. Following behind the L-13 is the T-6 Texan. That's what you would have called this aircraft if you were in the United States Army Air Corps during World War II. If you were in the Navy, the aircraft was called an SNJ. If you were in the Royal Canadian Air Force, you would have called this aircraft a Harvard. L-13 quickly back around. Again, you can see just how maneuverable these aircraft were. It's interesting to note that during World War II, an L-bird pilot was actually credited with downing a Messerschmitt Me-109, a German fighter. During the war, the German fighter thought he had an easy target with the L-bird, but because of its maneuverability, he was actually able to force the German to fly into the side of a hill and was actually credited with downing a German fighter during World War II. The air over Eielson Air Force Base as the T-6 Texan comes in. The T-6 Texan would have been the very first aircraft that a Army Air Corps cadet or Naval cadet would have had retractable landing gear and performance that would be similar or close to the types of fighter aircraft that they'd be flying into combat. Over 17,000 T-6 Texans were manufactured. They had a very long service life for a propeller-driven aircraft, as of course jets began to take over the scene shortly after World War II. T-6s were used by over 45 nations after World War II to train their pilots. As a matter of fact, the country of South Africa actually has declared the T-6 Texan a national treasure. It's amazing to think, ladies and gentlemen, these aircraft were designed and built over 75 years ago and still taking to the skies as dedicated men and women from organizations like the Commemorative Air Force and other organizations in the lower 48 are doing such a great effort and putting such time and effort and lots of money into keeping these World War II aircraft in the skies. I like museums. Museums are nice. It's great to go to a museum and see the aircraft, but there's nothing like watching what these aircraft were designed to do, and that's fly. So a lot of time and effort is put into these aircraft. As a matter of fact, some of these aircraft, of course, you just can't run down to your local aircraft auto parts dealer and pick up parts for them. Many times parts have to be manufactured from scratch to keep some of these aircraft in the air. The L-13 leading the way. The L-13 is a very rare aircraft indeed, as only 302 of this model aircraft were ever produced. So you're seeing an aircraft that was pretty rare almost off the assembly line. They were used extensively and quite a bit here in the Alaska area as the T-6 Texan currently comes into line. If you ever wondered what that loud sound is when a propeller-driven aircraft flies by like that roaring engine sound, that biting the air propeller, that's the wing tip, the tips of the propeller actually breaking the speed of sound that make that noise when a propeller-driven aircraft like the T-6 flies by, or a fighter of World War II. T-6 Texans, of course, used so much during World War II, but they got even into service during the Korean War as well, as they flew what were called mosquito missions. Smoke rockets could be mounted underneath the wings, and the aircraft were flown again over enemy territory. The smoke rockets were used to mark enemy positions, and again they were known as mosquito missions during the Korean War. The aircraft would continue to serve in the United States Armed Forces until the late 1950s, when they were finally retired from service. Again, you can see how the L-13 can just quickly turn back around, stay over a target. In a few moments, we'll get a quick demonstration. Look at this. Watch as he brings the nose down. You can see the aircraft doesn't need much of a runway. And of course, with those big bush tires on it, yeah, you can have some pretty good rocks in the way and still make a successful landing. Watch this. Again, how he slows that aircraft way down. And we'll use almost no runway whatsoever to safely be on the ground. T-6 from the wing left, all the fine folks here at Eielson Air Force Base. A number of aerobatic performers still use T-6 Texans in air shows all across the country. Built by North American Aviation, North American also built the legendary P-51 Mustang and the B-25 Mitchell, some of the aircraft that were legendary during World War II. But of course, you can't have a fighter or a bomber unless you train somebody on how to fly. And the T-6 Texan is one of those aircraft that just performed so admirably and perfectly in that role. And again, over 17,000 of them being manufactured during the war and afterwards. The T-6 Texan has an engine that produces about 600 horsepower, has a wingspan of 42 feet, maximum speed of a little over 200 miles an hour, and a service ceiling of over 21,000 feet. There are about 350 plus T-6 Texans still flying in the world today. L-birds are still very popular with a lot of warbird enthusiasts, as of course L-birds don't have quite the maintenance problems or the cost like a fighter plane or bomber would from World War II. On this next approach, the L-13, again, will be making a steep descend onto the runway, again, giving us a look at just how these aircraft can get into tight spots. Again, as the helicopter was being developed, the L-birds flew that role during World War II. As a matter of fact, L-13s were pressed into some service during the Korean War as well. Watch now as he points that nose down, and he'll execute a very short landing in the L-13. As the T-6 flies right over top. Now again, watch how he slows the aircraft way down, way down. Those big flaps slowing it to just almost nothing. And you can see again how quickly the aircraft can land, stop. Again, why this aircraft was so valuable during World War II in getting into tight spots. Another mission, believe it or not, that L-birds actually undertook during World War II was to mount bazooka tubes on the bottom of the wings, or on the support structure of the wing. And they would actually dive down on German tanks that were coming across the battlefield. And the Germans knew better when those little L-birds would show up with those bazooka rockets mounted on the wings. They could actually come down right on top of a German tank and just blow it to smithereens. Again, showing you the testimony of the guts and fortitude of some of the men that flew during World War II, because you think about it, an L-bird coming down to a battlefield, I mean, especially low to the ground fire could easily penetrate the L-bird, as they were only fabric covered aircraft. They didn't have metal coverings like the fighter aircraft would to protect the pilot. Many aircraft were modified and used in many different forms during World War II. The T-6 or the SNJ, again, as you were in the Navy, could be mounted with a 30 caliber machine gun in the back cockpit for air-to-air gunnery training. Bombs could be attached, practice bombs underneath the wings to use for aerial bombing. Again, a very versatile aircraft and one that served many nations around the world. The North American T-6 Texan, again taking us back 80 years, back to World War II, a war that started on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. America officially did not enter World War II until after the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941.